elderly woman catches 4 boys in her yard, cries when she realizes what they're doing.
But before we start, please make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell and smash that like button. We really appreciate your continuous support.
Laws and rules are what keep our society functioning the way it's supposed to. As some of you may know, the law isn't always foolproof, and sometimes rules are extremely easy to break, especially when you don't even know that they exist. The woman didn't understand why she was being told that she needed to go to court. She sat on the couch in her living room, overwhelmed with thoughts about what she should do next. While she was thinking about what her next step should be, she heard the sound of banging coming from her yard. She looked out the window to see what was going on, and that's when she saw them. As the 4 boys made their way towards her, shivers traveled down her spine. All she could think about was whether or not she should run. Jerry Suttle is a 75-year-old woman from Texas. She spends her time enjoying her retirement on her land, living as peacefully as she can. She was able to purchase land when she was younger, and now she's able to live out her life on her 2 acres. Jerry realizes that she's not as young and active as she once was, so she most certainly wasn't expecting the visit she got from police. As you know, every state has their own laws. But Texas has one law in particular that's left Jerry in a state of confusion. Jerry Suttle called Riesel, Texas her home for a long time. One of Riesel's laws states that the grass on your property can't be more than 18 inches tall, or you'll be issued a fine. Jerry was never informed about this law, and she was never given a fine either. So what was going to happen now? Danny Crumnow, the Riesel police chief, stated that Jerry's grass was too high and that she was in violation of the city ordinance. Even so, Jerry was never issued a ticket, so she had no clue what was going on. Eventually, the police showed up at her front door to inform her that she was being sent to jail. Jerry was so confused and had no clue what to do. There had to be some way to fix this, but Jerry didn't know where to start. Jerry claimed that she'd never received any kind of notice about going to court. Because of that, Jerry didn't show up in court, and a warrant for her arrest was issued. Jerry thought about her options. She was a bit too old and weak to mow the lawn herself, but she couldn't really afford to pay someone else to do the work either. She was in a real predicament, but she never expected what would happen next. Put yourself in Jerry's shoes and imagine how scared she must be, thinking that she was going to jail. How would she get herself out of this with no money and no help? She soon would find out that things were about to look up. As Jerry sat in her living room chair, she was at a loss on what to do next. She didn't have family that lived close, and her husband had passed away many years ago. She was out of options. But how could she go to jail? As she pondered on what to do, she began to hear strange sounds coming from outside. She crept to her window to get a closer look and felt shivers travel through her body. There were 4 boys coming towards her from the edge of her land. What were they doing on her property? What did they want? She began to grow nervous, and this was literally the last thing she needed. Were they a bunch of troublemakers who were targeting older people? As the boys got closer to her, she knew what she needed to do. She would fight. Unfortunately, home invasions are a very real concern for the elderly. Because they can be a bit weaker and naive than other people, the elderly are an easy target for those with ill intentions. Hopefully, Jerry was prepared for whatever was coming her way. As the boys moved closer, Jerry realized something different about them. These were young boys, very young boys. The oldest one was maybe 15. Even so, Jerry felt very uncomfortable about their presence. The boys began to look around her property, and when she could finally see them clearly, the boys had dirt and mud all over them. But what could they possibly be looking for? Confused but curious, Jerry tried to get a closer look. The boys began to play and laugh, but they were still on her property. Jerry had no clue what they were doing. Should she call the police? As soon as she grabbed her phone, she noticed that one of the boys grabbed a tool from a bag they were carrying. What in the world was going on? 2 of the boys stayed behind while the other 2 disappeared. The boys who stayed behind began to grab what looked like garden tools, such as some shears, a weed whacker, and a few other things. Jerry was in shock. What exactly were they doing? But as soon as the other boys came around the corner, she noticed that one of them had a lawnmower. Soon enough, the boys were in full swing, mowing the lawn and ripping out overgrown weeds. Jerry couldn't believe it. The boys' kind gesture brought tears to her face. She'd lived in that home for 59 years, and she was left speechless after seeing what the boys were doing for her. Could this really be happening? Just when she didn't know what she was going to do, 4 boys came forward and helped her out of nowhere. Did they know about the warrant, or were they just helping out of the kindness of their hearts? The 4 boys, who were actually brothers, explained to the news why they wanted to help. It's a summer day. We don't have season passes yet to Warren Falls. What else could we do? Just go out and help some people. The kind efforts of these 4 boys goes above and beyond just cutting grass. They had no clue that they had just saved Jerry from going to jail. One of the boys, Blaine Reynolds, said, "We haven't met her yet, but she's 75 years old and she needs some help mowing. That's the least we could do." One of the other brothers also said, "I really wouldn't want her coming out here and doing it or paying someone else when we could have just done it for free." As the sun was shining brightly, the next-door neighbors couldn't help but see what the boys were doing for Jerry. She rushed over to the boys to give them some cold drinks. Just then, she noticed 5 more men walking towards her property. As the men got closer, Jerry began to realize that they were carrying gardening tools with them as well. The neighbors came together and established a plan to help Jerry. Half of the helpers would team up and take care of one side, while the other group took care of the opposite side. Jerry Sutter's neighbors also helped the 4 boys with the property. Without question, her neighbors grabbed their own lawnmowers and got to work. Despite the 90-degree weather, the 4 brothers and the neighbors got together to make Jerry's life easier. Jerry looked outside and couldn't believe how many people came together to help her. The whole community was showing that they cared. "I cannot believe this. I'm very seldom without words, but this is one time, you mark it down in history, that I didn't have something to say," said Jerry. Jerry was in a state of shock when she realized that all of that work only took 2 hours to complete. She was left speechless by what these 4 boys and neighbors had done for her. The boys eventually heard about the warrant that was out for Jerry's arrest, and they couldn't believe it. "I'd do it for a second time or a third time. Anything to keep that lady from having to go to court," said Blaine Reynolds. Even though the boys were so young, they expressed such kindness and virtue. Once the grass had been cut and the yard looked nice again, Jerry was informed that she still needed to go to the courthouse to sign some papers that stated that she had never received the original papers that said she needed to go to court. Jerry obviously wanted the charges to be dropped, but the court had other intentions. It's very heartbreaking to see that someone that didn't even know came out and spent 2 hours in the sun doing what we thought the city wanted done, and then them turn around and say no, said Jerry. Unfortunately, the city stood by their decision about Jerry's violation, and they wanted her in the courtroom. But the community stood with Jerry. KWTX News turned to Facebook and other social media outlets and explained Jerry's story and how the community came to help her in her time of need. Thanks to the 4 kind boys, Jerry's warrant was revoked and she didn't have to go to court. This story proves that anything is possible when people come together to help those in need. Having someone bring their groceries into their home or giving a compliment to someone can completely change a person's day. So today, go out of your way to help someone who may need it. You'll make them feel better, which in turn will make you feel good as well.